Usually when we hear voices coming from Moscow, we talk about Putin, Medvedev, Peskov, and other people like Solovyov. They claim that Russia is about to sweep away the remaining resistance of Ukraine, and that even if it doesn't happen soon, our might will still crush their weakness. Is that really the case? Is Russia really that powerful, or is Ukraine really that weak? Let's start with the facts. According to their claims, Russia has a population of 140 million. Well, even if it's not 140 but 120 since they lie, it's still more than enough, you know. Well, let's put it this way. That's 3 times more than 45 million Ukrainians, and now it seems like there are 10 or maybe even 12 million fewer, because a lot of people have left. Since the 2000s, Russia has been preparing for armed conflicts, while Ukraine, well, ruined its military enterprises and didn't really take care of the state of its army. Even after Crimea, even after they found out in 2021 that Russia was preparing to attack again, Russia receives billions from trading energy resources, even from those countries that claim they support Ukraine. But they don't want to pay more for gasoline and gas to help Ukraine. Everything indicates that Russia should have easily broken the resistance of a poorly armed, not very wealthy neighboring country with a much smaller population. But they didn't break it. That's already a truism. But the resilience of Ukrainians, the weapons that Trump 45 supplied to Ukraine, and in a sense the chaos. In the Russian army, they stopped the offensive. Russia and Ukraine began negotiating a ceasefire at a time when Russia was shocked about a long-term peace. But Boris Johnson, on behalf of the European Union, and Biden conveyed to Zelensky a ban on stopping the war. And then this 3-year-long, exhausting and deadly campaign began, which, in my opinion, destroyed a third of Ukraine and killed more than 1 million people on both sides. What's happening inside Russia? Is everyone really so inspired by the idea of protecting the Russian-speaking population from mythical fascists? United States Vice President J.D. Vance recently said Russians
need to wake up and accept reality, said United States Vice President J.D. Vance on September 28. A lot of people are dying, and they don't have much to
show for it. Do they know this in Russia? Do they understand, or are they still in euphoria? Here's what a pro-Russian blogger, a former judge in Kiev, writes. So she moved to Moscow. She studied in Moscow. Then she went to Kiev. Then in 2021, I think, she moved to Moscow and supported the invasion of Ukraine. Here's what she writes while living in Moscow. Now,
the Russian government says at least 50,000 newly drafted soldiers are now in Ukraine. A long list of complaints emerges: lack of leadership from mid-level officers, tactics leading to heavy losses, and lack of training. The promised payments have not been received.
This was picked up by Cable News Network and included in their report on the war.
Who do not show this anger on the front lines? The wives and mothers of these mobilized soldiers who stayed behind also expressed their rage. By the end of 2023, Chatham House said these family members are an increasing threat to Putin as they keep organizing protests, petitions, and appeals. These are significant headaches for Putin. These protests were signs of internal anger, which seemed to be crystallized by a caller on NTV who directly said that Russia is lying to its people.
Voices are already emerging in Russia saying Putin is lying, it seems. People have been and still are imprisoned for saying this, yet these words are heard more often.
remember. This should
have been
a quick and easy occupation.
It wasn't meant to cost Russia so much that it had to mobilize troops twice and offer high salaries to attract contract soldiers. In the end, Putin will run out of soldiers. He'll either be forced to abandon his ambitions in Ukraine or make a choice that could turn the dissatisfied population against him. Russia is losing and Putin knows it's inevitable, but let's
look at how the war is unfolding and what actually happened.
The United States claims Russia has lost the war, but many Russians now admit defeat too. This is a major blow to Putin, as Russians acknowledge the war in Ukraine is lost. It wasn't supposed to go this way for Putin. When his troops first entered Ukraine in February 2022, he expected that any Ukrainian resistance would be quickly crushed. Of course, Russia might suffer some losses, but the tanks would roll into Kyiv and Ukraine would have no choice but to surrender. Just like it happened when Russia annexed Crimea in 2014. The problem began when Ukraine put up a tough resistance. Russia's unprepared forces were pushed back. After losing many of the early gains made during the initial special military operation, Western military aid started to arrive. Ukraine transformed modern warfare by deploying drones. And here we are, approaching 4 years since Putin began his invasion.
3.5 years, half a year, 3 million dead. And for what? Let's hear Montian right here.
Tatiana Montian is one of these voices. Unlike frequent critics of Putin and Russia, Montian is a pro-Kremlin propagandist, reports Kyiv Independent. She mainly follows the party line. This means that for the past few years, she has been repeating everything Putin wants her to say to convince the Russian people that Putin's war is going better than it seems. It seems that's no longer the case. During an interview on September 22, Montian said that things are so bad that soon she will have to do something radical. A second wave of mobilization is on the horizon. In the first half of September, the pace of the offensive slowed down significantly. Perhaps they have used up their last reserves, Montian said about the Russian army in Ukraine. Montian isn't a Western commentator the Kremlin can call biased. She's one of their own. And now she is revealing information about the situation with manpower and Russia's territorial gains that contradicts the Kremlin's official line. And she is not the only one. Just a day before Montian's interview, Dmitry Rogozin made a similar statement. Rogozin is also part of the pro-Kremlin camp. He's significant enough that Putin made him a Russian senator for the occupied areas of Zaporizhia.
Rogozin is a senator appointed by Putin. He shouldn't contradict his patron.
Rogozin's voice says that Russia is losing. In an interview with the Russian media outlet Bloknot, Rogozin was asked a direct question, why hasn't Russia been able to defeat Ukraine yet? He made some excuses, stating, in our country we have only 2 allies, the Army and the Navy, Russia's 2 allies. At present, the Navy is less involved for obvious reasons. And on the other side, there are many high-tech countries that have taken the side of the Kyiv coup regime. Well, it seems like Rogozin is trying to play the card of poor little Russia. Reading between the lines reveals the truth. Western sanctions are pressuring Russia, says Rogozin. It's starting to affect the battlefield. Russia, once considered one of the strongest military powers in the world, doesn't have enough of what it needs for significant territorial advances. Rogozin says Ukrainian drones are a problem and claims Ukraine has 10 times more than Russia. Russia can't stop it because Ukrainian drone makers operate underground and are beyond Russia's reach. The front line is advancing slowly with our troops paying a huge price for progress, adds Rogozin. It is this colossal price that connects Rogozin's comments with Montian's remarks. Both of these pro-Kremlin commentators point out that the Russians are paying too high a price in Russian blood for tiny gains inside Ukraine. Money.
There is enough money in Russia. Cannon fodder is leverage. No one cares about people with their own destinies, by the way, their love, children, work, and problems. People don't concern Kremlin at all. But even with the Chinese and Koreans brought in, there are still fewer and fewer of them. A mass mobilization is coming, I think. How will people react to this? It scares the Kremlin. The hoofed ones who are used to obediently staying silent might go wild. This has happened in Russia before. Well, remember Senka, Razin, Pugachev, Makhno.
Pavel Gabarev. The former pro-Russian representative and people's governor in Donetsk shared his views on Rogozin's statement via Telegram. He concluded Russia's high losses are due to being on the offensive, while Ukraine is defending. He says the Ukrainian military is pleased, especially now that they're targeting Russian oil refineries. Gabarev reported that 26%.
Many facilities in Russia have been fully or partially shut down. I haven't been following this, but to me, it's serious news.
Because of these strikes, which slow down the wheels of the Russian war machine just as much as the country's huge losses, Ukraine gains leverage from these strikes on oil refineries because they target Russian territory. This is another thing that Putin never expected when he started his invasion. Then Gabarev said something Putin never expected to hear from a former appointee. Russian propaganda keeps misleading the public, claiming the Ukrainian armed forces are nearly defeated. But in reality, we are wearing down the enemy and will soon win. However, the situation has reached a stalemate and is actually a defeat, Gabarev said. More.
Another of Putin's puppets said that the lack of progress deeper into Ukraine means defeat.
But it seems that Gabarev is simply reflecting the growing sense of anger toward Putin that is being felt across Russia. Many Russians are realizing the Kremlin has lied to them for years, or as the death toll rises, they are finding the courage to speak out when they previously wouldn't have. Kyiv Independent exemplifies the apparent source of rising anti-Putin sentiment within Russia. Before any of these comments, allegedly made by pro-Kremlin propagandists, came to life in Russian state media, Russia's state television channel N Television broadcasted a live political talk show called Mesto Vstrechi in the September 19 episode. In this program, a guest said the Kremlin's reported casualty numbers for Ukraine are simply impossible. With the start of hostilities, the Ukrainian army grew to 800,000 people. Then, along the way, it increased by about 100,000 to 120,000 per year, the guest noted. Losses of 1.7 to 2 million are impossible. Otherwise, the Ukrainian army wouldn't exist. That's an interesting figure. This suggests the Kremlin claims Ukraine lost up to 2 million people, about double Russia's losses per the Ukrainian Ministry of Finance. As the guest says, that's impossible.
When your own puppets start scratching their heads and doubting, not only doubting, but also voicing their doubts, that's very bad for the regime.
The situation for Putin is getting so bad that even Kremlin-controlled media are becoming so uneasy that they're ready to broadcast dissent. It's likely not a coincidence that commentators claiming Russia is losing in Ukraine began speaking out after this interview. Perhaps the turning point has already come. Now Putin risks being swept away by a wave of increasingly negative public opinion. Let's go back to what Gabarev said about Russia losing the war. Maybe they knew, but not as you might think. Gabarev, like the other commentators, isn't claiming Russia has lost or that its army will collapse due to Ukraine's defense. This defeat isn't traditional, where one side destroys the other. Instead, it results from multiple factors. As mentioned earlier, the special military operation expected to last days has continued for years. This is already a defeat, as it showed the world that Russia is not an effective military power. The first loss is the humiliation caused by the failure to achieve a quick victory. I
completely agree that this is a huge loss for Russia. It was considered a serious military force, and now what's left of that? Well, they only have the atomic bomb, but as an army, as a power, they don't have it anymore.
The second and much more important loss is that Russia cannot win. It may sound strange, but an attacking country that doesn't advance loses just as much as a country destroyed by the attacker. That's Russia's problem. Despite deploying many resources and people in Ukraine, it has captured almost no territory. Each day brings more deaths and evidence that Russia will eventually have to abandon its goal of denying Ukraine's sovereignty.
On the fifth day after the war began, I said that no matter what happens, by driving the enemy away from Kiev, Ukraine has won, in the sense that it has defended its sovereignty. At that time, I didn't know that Boris Johnson would rush to Zelensky and, on behalf of Biden and members of the European Union, demand not to freeze the conflict, but to continue the war. Thus, Russia got a second chance, but as you can see, it failed to take advantage of it.
What are the signs of Russia's impending defeat? Let's start with Russia's minor territorial gains. Kyiv Independent emphasizes how terrible these gains were for Russia in 2025. Keep in mind that this was the year when Putin launched Russia's summer offensive against Ukraine. At the beginning of this offensive, Putin declared, "All of Ukraine is ours," wrote the Atlantic Council on September 2. The president of Russia said, "We have reason to believe we can defeat the Ukrainian forces." Back in March, assuming that Putin was confident in a quick Russian victory, or maybe he wasn't sure, maybe he was lying to his people again. The summer offensive is over and the numbers are known. Ukrainian Mapping and Deep State, an open-source intelligence group, report that Russia gained 1,548 square kilometers during the summer offensive, but that's only 0.256% of Ukraine's total territory.
After losing 100,000 of its soldiers, Russia captured 0.2% of Ukraine's territory. This is called first victory.
If you take the entire year 2025 into account, the numbers start to look even worse. From January 1 to August 31, Russia lost 210,000 of its soldiers due to death or injury. The failed summer offensive caused more losses than necessary, but losses remain higher than Putin expected when invading Ukraine. Last year, according to Al Jazeera, Russia was able to capture only 4,168 square kilometers, which is equivalent to 1,609 square miles, at the cost of 427,000 of its soldiers. That's just 637,000 Russian troops lost for less than 1% of Ukraine.
637 Russian soldiers lost and 5,800 square kilometers captured since February 2022. So each dead Russian soldier or officer brought Russia 9 square meters of Ukrainian land, Ukrainian territory. Now we can easily find out how many servicemen Putin would have to sacrifice for Russia to capture 100% of Ukraine. We need to multiply 637,000 lost by the number of square kilometers captured, and we get 63 million soldiers. I know you'll say it's not necessary to bring a country to its knees to win. You don't need to capture all of Ukraine. Taking at least half might force a surrender, though they still may not give in. Well, let's say you need to capture half. But for that, Russia would have to lay 3.65 million conscripts in the ground. You know, there's an old Soviet joke. A journalist asks, "And your horse, can it eat 3 buckets of barley?" The Kolkhoznik thinks for a moment and says, "Eat it? Sure, she could eat it, but who would give it to her?" Just like that, right away. Where is she supposed to get 35.5 million soldiers? Well, only if the Chinese send all their Red Guards. Even then.
This is a war of attrition that Russia started, and Russia is losing it. Of course, Putin doesn't want anyone to realize this, so he lies. On September 30, Dargin admitted he was caught lying. It all started when the Russian Ministry of Defense published a map on its Telegram channel. At first glance, nothing seemed suspicious. The ministry said the map showed Russia's territorial gains since early 2025. Though these supposed gains could be disputed, everything seemed normal. However, some observant people noticed that this map was anything but normal. The map was not up to date. In fact, it was at least 50 years old. This was evidenced by the fact that the city of Siversk was marked as Yama on the map. Siversk hasn't been called Yama since 1973. There were other problems with the names as well, including the use of city names on the map that Russia had previously rejected but Ukraine had accepted. For example, Bakhmut was labeled as Bakhmut, which seems fine. But Russia no longer uses that name, even though it once did, says Dargins. He kind of started using that name from time to time in official documents. Combined with the Yama issue, Russia's use of Bakhmut further shows it's relying on an outdated map. Russia appears to be using an old map to misrepresent its territorial gains. The Russian Ministry of Defense damaged its reputation with just one map. Why use such an old map unless trying to falsify the data? Perhaps the map used old city boundaries that no longer exist, creating the impression that Russia had captured more territory than it actually had. Or maybe Russia really relies on maps that are decades old and actually has no idea how little territory it is claiming.
To be honest, I think they're using old maps for a very simple reason. Money was allocated for new ones, and they stole it.
Russia may soon need mobilization. Montaigne suggested Russia may have depleted its last reserves this summer, so Putin must seek manpower elsewhere. You'll never hear the president of Russia say that. However, one of the most well-known military figures in America claims that the Kremlin believes Russia has lost the war in Ukraine. This is Kit Kellogg, the United States president's special envoy to Ukraine. On September 30, United 24 reported Kellogg's comments at the Warsaw Security Forum. Deep down, I think Putin knows he can't win. This is a losing battle for him. That won't happen in the long run, said Kellogg. He added that Ukraine is making this long-term outlook even bleaker with its strikes on Russia's oil refineries. Each strike limits the amount of gasoline and diesel fuel that Russia can send to its troops, sell to other countries, and provide to its citizens. Kellogg says that any action depriving Russia of petrodollars is a good step, because it will push Putin even closer to the realization that many in Russia have already reached. The war in Ukraine is now unwinnable for Russia.
Is the correct term. Unwinnable, that is, well, meaningless and hopeless.
And if the war can't be won, it means Russia has lost. Putin faces internal chaos at home while thousands of his soldiers die in Ukraine. For Putin, it's almost over, as Russia is about to plunge into chaos after the war with Ukraine turned against the Russian leader.
I actually have nothing to add to this, except that Putin might decide to freeze the war, stay on the same front line, and not advance. Because when you advance, you get killed. Yes, trying to wear down Ukraine and the West. With Donald J. Trump's new attitudes, this is a tactic. Subtitles by Dima Torzak. It's nothing will come of it, and it will work against him. Until next time.